Hi, today on the 01581, Let's Talk, a visit with Senator Michael Moore and a very special guest. Tune in. Hi, and welcome back to the 01581. I'm joined today by Senator Michael Moore and a very special guest, Karen Henderson, General Manager of Westboro TV. Karen, thank you for joining.
Thanks for.
And how does it feel to be on the other side?
I don't like it. That's why I do this job. I like to be on the other side of the camera, Senator Moore. But I'm happy to join you today.
Excellent. And Karen is not just here as a talking head. She's actually here because we've got relevant comments. So relevant content. Excuse me. So welcome back.
Thank you. It's nice to be back.
Yeah, thanks for trekking out here, although you live out here, but from the State House. So what's going on? What's going on in the world of Senator Michael Moore?
Well, we've had a lot of activity.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of hearings going on. Actually, I'm testifying at one yesterday regarding the right to repair. So we had issues with that. We're trying to work on with the second referendum.
Yep.
And some glitches what we have in that language. Today I've got a Cannabis Control Commission hearing that I have to testify, and then there's two this afternoon. But we still have the budget also going on,
Yep.
so that's still pending. So it's the way we had left it after our last show. The budget had been completed and had gone to conference committee. The conference is where you have the Senate version and the House version, and then you have a committee that sits and negotiates it out. Sadly, we had to do what's called the 1/12 budget, and that's a 1-month budget. So we had to pass that. Actually, we did that last week, just before the end of June, so that we had. So unlike Washington, there's no threats of government shutting down. So that's been done, but the budget's still in conference, so we're still trying to wait to see what happens and what's going to with the negotiations. I think we had said last time we've got some earmarks in there for Westboro, in the House side and the Senate side. So hopefully it's going to come out okay, and then. We had, so I chair I'm going to just read this because I always get it mixed up. I chair the Senate, I'm the Senate chair of the Committee on Information Technology, the Internet, and Cyber Security. And we had our first hearing this past week, actually last week, and we had a very special guest on. We had over 40 people testifying. Yeah. So. Shelby was one of the individuals testifying virtually, but one of the issues that came up at the hearing was the PEG access bill, and that's why we thought we'd have Karen come and explain the whole issue, and we can talk about how the hearing went.
Karen's like, I didn't know that's why I was here.
That's perfect.
So I kind of dropped it on Karen this morning.
Yeah.
So
that's great.
That's how we work here. That's how we roll.
There you go. Surprise the director.
Yeah. Oh, that could be a new segment.
Right. I don't like it.
As viewers may or may not be aware, we and Karen, you've come before the select board several times asking for kind of support as this kind of streaming bill has worked its way through various iterations, if you will, of the Senate and House legislatures over the years. This is not a new not a new bill. So the essence of it, and Karen, feel free to add here, but is that as users, consumers cut their cords, so to speak, from traditional cable and receive media through streaming services, the revenue that local access channels such as Westboro TV receives goes down, because that revenue, the primary revenue that drives all the operations, provides expenses, salary, staffing, etc., comes from cable TV revenue per subscriber. And so as that cable cord is cut, that revenue has continued to go down. And as I recall from the numbers that I had presented, between 2021 and 2022, that number for Westboro TV alone decreased by 35%. Or it was either that or over the past 5 years. But the point is it's
past
gone
5
down.
years.
Past 5 years. Yep. Thank you. So, whereas YouTube viewership has gone up like a hockey stick, if you were to look at it on a chart, which again kind of supports that trend, right? So, so the streaming bill really is targeted at recouping that revenue stream from streaming providers, because even though people have cut the cord, they really haven't cut the cord, because that cord is still running on the telephone poles that are in public rights of way, which is why why cable TV have to provide revenue to municipalities to begin with. So those streaming companies are still using those lines, and they're connecting in some way, unless you're using a satellite, to local homes. So the idea is that this bill would replace that revenue. Did I capture that?
I think it was very well done.
Wow.
You want to talk
Yeah.
about the percentage, because that's in the bill.
Yeah.
The 5%.
So that's sort of the overview, and then there was an opportunity, which was a great experience. I had never done it before, so Karen, thank you for that opportunity to actually testify.
So just to jump in quickly, the pandemic.
Yep.
Prior to the pandemic, the legislature, being one of the oldest buildings in the country, never had access to having virtual hearings. Right. So with that, when the pandemic hit, we went to hybrid hearings. We continued that process. So we had, like I said, we had over 40 people testifying, and so Shelby came through for the town, and she was testifying in the hearing virtually, explaining the town positions and the benefits for this. So
she
did a great job too, by the way.
Thank you. So it was it was about 3 minutes. You have a chance to address the committee, and you have to state your position, and so I did that, and then actually have submitted that same written testimony to the committee so that they have that as well. But in essence, and again, just kind of reviewing our notes here, is that the proposed bill would have streaming services pay 5% of their gross annual revenue from sales. And so the 5% is really a mirror image of what cable companies pay per subscriber to the cable stations. Is that correct, Karen?
Correct. So, I think a lot of times people, the understanding, people kind of feel like we must just be a town department or a town service. Right. But really what happens is all towns will enter into an agreement with the cable providers in their town that says, okay, great, you can use our public rights of way and provide cable. But in exchange, one of the things we'd like in our contract is funding for our local access PEG, public education government, PEG funding for our local access stations. And you can get up to 5% of those gross annual revenues within your town. So as we have lost subscribers, those revenues have decreased, and Westboro TV's money has decreased. Right. So that money, sometimes in Westboro, it comes directly to Westboro TV. Mm-hmm. In some towns, it goes to the town itself, the money from the cable companies. But then it needs to be used for cable-related services. So then they will then provide cable-related services with that money. They can't take that money and go pay for insurance or something else with it. Right. So the idea is that viewing habits have shifted from generic, regular, traditional cable to these streaming services. And so the idea would be just to...
So just to clarify, so when you say streaming, because Shelby had talked about YouTube. When you're talking streaming, you're talking Netflix, you're talking Hulu, all these
Prime, TV,
all these other
Sure. Right. So the idea would be to shift kind of that money that has been coming from cable and cable viewers to the streaming companies where people are now streaming. Like when someone gets rid of cable, it's not because they're not watching TV anymore or consuming shows. They're switching to a streaming service, and so the idea is that we need this sustainable source of funding, so that you can plan, and you can't be wondering every year, are we going to get funding? Are we not going to get funding? Right. Especially for an organization like this, you mentioned the hybrid meetings now. I think we sometimes say like, oh, they cover government meetings. So critical that we not only cover government meetings, but we go in and we have to record them. We provide hybrid access, which means they can be watching on TV, they can be watching on cable, on streaming, you can have members that are not present who are presenting, and everybody in the room can see and hear them, and they can see and hear everything in the room. We then take it, we're again streaming to online, we're also going to cable. We then record that so that it's available for playback. We archive it. We had our planning board recently ask us for 6 months worth of meetings From 2011, I think they needed those because they needed to go back to see what had
What were
actually
their
been
discussions,
said.
right,
What was
yeah.
the intention?
Yep, yep.
So it's not a simple thing. I heard during the testimony someone said something like, "Well, our phones can do these things now."
Yeah.
And it's so much more complicated than using a phone to record a meeting. There's
Right.
so much more to it, and
Right.
it's a huge service for transparency in government. It really
Oh,
is.
And accessibility. I mean,
Yep.
excuse me. It just
No, go ahead.
I think that's the other thing that we saw that during the pandemic, which was people were home and they were much more involved in what was happening locally, and that trend has continued. And so, interest in, and I mean, we're talking here a lot about kind of the government element of PEG,
Sure.
but there's just general public, which is sort of what we're doing here, public information and sharing, which is critically important, and then the educational component. So many families, kind of watch games or they see plays, or there's certainly school committee, or is that, I'm sorry, school committee under government, or is
Put
it
that under government, but there's
Okay.
a little overlap
Yeah.
there. But you're right, and I have so many people who will say to me how amazing it is that they have family. Someone approached me during one of our fine arts events and said their family in India was tuning in to watch that concert and to be able to make that connection. So not just within our community,
Yeah.
but beyond for
Right.
families and.
Well, and folks who who are older that can't get to the football stadium or the away game because they don't drive. Maybe they can see the home games, but so it's a way for them to maintain that social connectivity, which we all know is so so important and continues to be lacking.
Also can't get to the town meeting. Also
Right.
can't go to the selectmen's meeting or the
Right.
school committee meeting.
All of that.
All of that.
Absolutely.
So that
Absolutely.
accessibility, as Karen said, the transparency is so important. And then the other piece of this that I think it's important for viewers to understand is that as some number of individuals cut, which is their decision, the cable, then those who are still maintaining their cable subscription really are paying an unfair share of the total kind of bill, if you will, because or not the total bill, because they're still paying their same percentage, but the support for local access TV is coming from a much smaller base, and yet everyone is benefiting from the work. So that's really why we just need to find that other funding source.
So some of the issues, and we can that came up at the hearing just to discuss. As Shelby stated, for the streaming, so you still have the cable coming in from the street to the house,
Yep.
and all these streaming services are utilizing it. So the question is, how do we determine the funding?
Right.
If we went to, now if everyone goes on their TV and you hit the, I guess the input button or the guide and you see all the different streaming services, well, this legislation would require 5% from each one of them.
Right.
So now the income coming in is going to far exceed
Sure.
what's currently being received. So how do we go about determining or making it a little more equitable on that? So that's one. So
Right.
that's one thing on the streaming providers that they have a legitimate argument.
Yeah.
If Netflix is paying 5%, Hulu's paying 5%, Prime's paying 5%.
And as a consumer, I have all three that I'm paying, I'm
Right.
paying more, whereas you're right, that part doesn't seem quite balanced.
Right. So, but their service is still being provided through
Right.
that connection.
Right.
Sure.
So
Right.
there should be
Right.
some responsibility.
It would be interesting. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Karen.
No, but and in some degree, each of those services might cost you less than your traditional cable. So
Yep.
you could
Right.
be paying less for those. So your 5% isn't necessarily, let's say you were paying cable and now you've got 3 different
You're paying
streaming,
$100
isn't
here,
necessarily
right.
triple.
Exactly.
But certainly a concern. One of the things, the way the bill is drafted currently, is to give some portion to local access, to give some portion to the state,
Yep.
and to give some portion to the town, to the municipality for their own purposes, not
Sure.
for cable-related purposes.
Yep.
So it is divvied up so that the state gets a portion, the town gets a portion, and a portion would go specifically to local access. That's how it's written currently.
Right. Right. And this is where, from the state end, looking at from our end, the purpose of the bill is not to be a revenue generation method for the state. So that's one of the questions that came up is why. why is there revenue going to the state from this? So there were some legitimate questions that came up at the hearing. One thing I will say that was positive, other than one person who questioned long-term technology changes, one of the senators that sat to my left, everyone was complimentary and spoke about the importance of PEG, whether it's, especially with the loss of all the print media.
Yes, print media.
I mean, I think back when I first got elected, every town had a small town paper.
Right.
A lot of those are gone now.
Yeah.
You may be catching them online. Even the TNG doesn't cover
Right.
like
and they
it
were
used.
covering those local meetings. So,
Yes.
you know, you get...
you have a couple of reporters
Right,
at those. When I
absolutely.
served on school committee, there'd be, you
Right.
could look at them out in the audience.
And it was
so-
but the thing, it was unfiltered. You know, you've got it, and if you look at today, think about when you watch national media. Fox, MSNBC,
Yeah.
CNN, if you tell someone, well, I watch this station, oh, that's a liberal station.
Yeah,
Well, that's a
yeah.
conservative station.
Sure.
PEG gives you really a non
Unbiased, yeah,
yes,
yeah.
so people can watch it, and you know I guess the way media should be.
draw their own conclusions
conclusions.
about what was the intent of that, what was conveyed, what questions were asked. Yeah, I mean, it really is.
So it does play into that. So the importance of it. So I thought one of the I took out of the hearing was you did a great job. The PEG community,
Yep.
out of the 40 or 45 people we had testifying,
Yes.
80% of them were all there on the PEG,
Yeah.
which is good. When you have a hearing, to see the advocates come out for it and advocate is always a positive to have a strong showing. But the other thing was that, again, other than one colleague who didn't criticize PEG, just more questioned where we are with technology, that is streaming going to be gone in 10 years or 15 years? What's the technology? So, you know, okay, there's a question there.
Yeah.
But other than that, everyone spoke positively of the PEG system. And so I guess it's figuring out
Yeah.
the other method of payment that came up. And actually, it was Representative Turco, and I forgot who else was talking about that this should probably be something that the state funds.
Oh, Feingold. I
Yeah,
thought.
was it
I thought
Feingold?
Maybe.
All right,
yeah.
the state funds as part of our funding back to the cities and towns, where it's a municipal service. So I guess that's a question: how, you know, could we add it to the cherry sheet? You know, maybe there's another way we can go about trying to do this.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, definitely interesting.
Well, I think that, I mean, it seems that the committee, certainly as part of its work, and I certainly don't know the ins and outs, could, you know, it's a little bit of a mathematical calculation of looking at what the, you know, average cost of, you know, I know what I pay Verizon Fios. It's a lot each month,
Yep.
right? So what are those kind of average costs across various counties or municipalities, and then look at, you know, the average number of streaming services that are coming into each person's home, and kind of look at that. And Karen, to your point, I mean, I think we pay almost $300 a month for Verizon. I don't think that that's an exaggeration. It's far. Now, we also pay for some streaming services, but those are like, I mean, I think Netflix is my highest at maybe $20.
Okay.
But I think that there's a way to kind of look at the numbers and say, because it does seem like, well, what if someone has 8 streaming services? Should they have, you know, should those streaming each one of those be hit for that 5%? Well, maybe they should, to get, because the whole idea here is to keep, you know, local access net neutral, right? I mean, to keep the revenue, at least that's my objective,
Yeah.
not necessarily to have this windfall of revenue.
Correct, and that's a concern
Right.
with the way the bill's written.
Right,
is
right.
the
So-
windfall.
right,
So,
right.
So that's actually what you were saying is I actually said to my staff after the meeting was, could we look at the communities right
Yep.
now,
Yep.
cities and towns,
Sure.
and look at to see what percentage of viewers right now are being charged this 5% or paying this 5%,
Yep.
and maybe we could somehow develop a formula.
Yep.
And that could be either sent to, and I'm just going to throw a company, that could be charter,
Yeah.
and say, okay, look at this is what the percentages of the community right now, this is what you're paying, and let them go back and determine what the fee should be to the streaming services. Maybe 1% to each service.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying.
And then
Yep,
this way,
yep.
okay, so with the
Sure.
500,000, okay, now all these streaming services that
Yep.
we have, that's who we're going to
Sure.
figure out the bill for the 500 that they're going to pay. Or we use the same, or we go back and look at a formula. And then the state comes up with a formula that we reimburse the cities and towns as part of the cherry sheet.
Right.
So the cherry sheet is, at the end of every year, is the sheet that the state uses. They call it the cherry sheet. That gives back the state funding to the cities and towns every year. So maybe we could somehow add that to that. So
I'm curious, as part of the, like, kind of the work that happens behind the scenes, so do you feel like it's understood among kind of the joint committee of that, you just said something that piqued my interest, of the relationship between the cable companies and the streaming services. So in my mind, probably incorrectly, I'm thinking the streaming services are sort of a group unto themselves.
Yep.
And I don't think it's incorrect to say Verizon in this state owns most of the lines and, like, poles, not so much Charter and otherwise. So somehow there's a relationship between those services to be able to plug into and use the lines. But do you feel like that's well understood in order to get to maybe that calculation? I know I certainly don't understand it. Meaning, you've got all these streaming services, and somehow their data is coming in, feeding into these lines that are owned by Verizon or Charter or whomever. So is it the cable company's responsibility to negotiate with those streaming services, or is it the state's?
that would be the cable company for the use of those lines.
Okay.
So whoever's coming in, that would be between those two.
So then administering the bill, I guess I'm just sort of talking out loud here, kind of the actual, so all of those charges would then be, or the revenue would ultimately come back
So that's why, actually, looking at how you're describing it, that actually could go more to how I was thinking that we did this, so that if a Verizon is the provider, if they've got, and Westboro, they're paying Westboro, say, $1 million a year. Okay,
That'd
so
be really nice.
Yeah, that would be nice.
just throwing that out to the selectmen. If you're getting $1 million a year, so now Verizon then looks at, okay, we have 15 streaming services coming in. So maybe they look at and say, okay, these 15, this is how we divide up among the 15 services
Right.
the cost of that.
Well, and so here's my
So just so you know, so basically,
Yeah.
so we've had I don't want to name companies.
Yeah.
We've had companies come in, testify in support of the legislation.
Yep.
We've had some come in opposition to it, and actually part of their opposition is that they're like, well, the law's fine the way it is. We don't have a problem paying
course
it
they
right
don't.
now,
Right.
Because they see the numbers going down.
Right. Right.
So there's really been no one. There's really been no one's criticized having PEG access.
Sure.
It's
Where's
Where's
whose
the
bucket
funding?
does it come
right.
from?
And
Right.
and we've had companies come say, look, we're happy to pay it.
Right.
It's like, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
But that 5%. So I don't know if you could even lock in that number, and have a cost of living increase that it's going to
Sure,
keep peace with cost
sure.
of living. But
Right.
so the question is, I guess, developing. You make how you make the
Right.
the bread or whatever in the
Yeah.
kitchen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I guess
Sauce, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So how we get there,
Right.
but.
It's interesting you commented on how many people from local access spoke out and testified. One thing that is absolutely true is that it is a very strong community of people who are champions of that local access. So we're very much believe in what we do. I mean, it's not a job where you're getting rich quick or even getting rich along the line.
Ever.
You have a very strong sense of community, and we're close to it, and we know the importance of my call from the Willows from the woman who really wants to see the basketball games, and she's tuning in, and the religious services and the government services. We see the value that it adds regularly, and so we have a lot of champions for that, and I think it'll be interesting to see, when you get that bill, how it can, let's say you decide this isn't the way we want to structure the bill. So then what happens? I mean, in other words, I like that you said that people see the value and that there's an understanding. I think raising that this is not sustainable, we cannot keep operating with a 35% loss in revenue and, of course, increasing expenses. Although around here they don't increase a lot. I'm very cheap. But
what happens now is myself and the House chair, because that's what they call a joint committee. You have a chairman from the House, you have a chairman from the Senate. We will sit down and we will go through the testimony and the different concepts. And we have to determine, between the two of us, do we redraft the bill and send it out with a different concept?
Yep.
Do we, and now I think last session the bill just got sent to study.
Right.
right.
And
Which is sort of like death by study.
yeah, basically, it's Senator Feingold who was to the left of me in the hearing. He was the chair last year.
Yep.
So, so we have to determine which avenue will be the best one to try to pursue, and then we have to look at what's the cost. So if we want to make it a cost to the Commonwealth, I think the figure came up about $65 million. And don't hold me to that, because that was from a testimony.
Okay.
Someone testified that if the state were to pick up the cost, it would be an added $65 million to the state budget.
Okay.
That we then have to disseminate throughout the communities based on what? Is there a formula?
Right, right.
Or just the
Is it per
existing?
capita?
Right.
Is it, like,
So
what's the formula?
if we do that, or we try to figure out, like we just talked about a little while ago, the concept. So
Yeah.
we'll have to see from there.
Go ahead, Karen.
Sorry, when the cherry sheet comes out, is there one formula, say, for Westboro, and all the numbers
Yes,
follow?
that's all based
So
on
there's
formula.
one formula, or are there multiple
Well, it
formulas
depends
for
on
the
the funding
different
stream
line items?
for the different line items. There'd be
I
different.
mean, I know
funding.
school is one, but then
But you're asking, regardless of community, for that one line item, is that
Every
formula the same for every community?
Yes, yeah. When you do a formula, that's the whole concept. The whole concept of having a formula is that you have a formula, and this way everyone's getting judged on the same parameters.
sure.
Got it.
So if you were to add it to the cherry sheet, it would go along with whatever Westboro's current formula is for what comes to us from the state, separate from Chapter 70.
Yes.
But
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
specific to
Yes. But
this.
specific to this.
Yep.
So
So-
the multiplier for this might be
Yeah.
whatever.
And just so again, we're
Yeah.
just throwing these ideas out
Yeah,
there. So
yeah,
that,
yeah.
so and this is basically what we'll do.
Like a brainstorm, live
and-
brainstorming session.
Right. So basically, this is what myself and the House chair will do. We'll
Interesting.
sit and okay, this is what we're looking
Yeah.
at, and then we have to research the cost.
Sure.
If we can determine it. If not, then sometimes we could send the bill out with that being a question, and then if it goes to Ways and Means, Ways and Means is the committee that handles all money issues
Yep.
for any legislation. So they could then possibly deal with DOR
Yeah.
and try to determine what the cost could be.
Sure.
So, but it is so. The issue we have is when you change the concept of a bill.
Yep.
What happens is you can either get it on a trajectory where it's got a better chance of passing.
Sure.
Because now you've got a better concept in trying to pursue it.
Yep.
But the problem is that then it could also slow it down.
Sure.
Because now,
It's like-
okay, whether we're doing the research and trying to build up
Yeah.
that direction, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, so maybe next session it gets done.
Yeah.
But it's done with this
Yeah.
this funding source.
Sure.
So that's the issue that you always have.
So one thing to think about just is where we were talking about the streaming relationship between the cable companies. One of the areas that I would caution kind of the legislators, and I certainly feel this from our lens, having served on the Cable TV Advisory Committee and recently negotiated one of our cable contracts, transparency between the cable companies and local access, because we all have to negotiate. So Westboro TV negotiates its contract with the relevant cable companies that participate
Right.
here in town.
Well, the town of Westboro does.
Well, the
not
town
Westboro
does,
TV.
right.
Sorry.
Thank you, sorry, thank you. But my point is that getting data from those cable companies is near impossible. So if we're asking cable companies to be I'm going to say kind of the gatekeeper and the holder of the information,
That
the
they have to
transparency,
submit that. Okay.
call me a bit skeptical, but I would those reporting parameters and that data, because it's their revenue base, and I get it. Like I
Yep.
own a for-profit company, and I didn't just sort of say willy-nilly, like, here, let me just kind of open the books to you. So what authority does the state through this legislation have to, kind of pull the layers of that off? So that will
Okay.
be interesting, kind of as your staff and your
Okay.
teams look into that.
Right.
Because it's, it shouldn't just be take us at our word.
Yeah.
Right, right. And I
So-
think part of the bill and the way we structured it was thinking, people traditionally watched cable, and that's how local access was paid for, and their viewing habits have shifted.
Yep.
And so as the viewing habits have shifted, to have the funding shift from one source to another made sense to us. So, but it will be interesting to see what the conversations are and
Right.
kind of
That's-
ironing things out.
So the problem could be is that this also within the problem you could have in the committee where, and I would hate to see something like this happen, but I could sit down with the House chair, and again we haven't discussed it yet,
Yep.
Yeah.
and they may be, well, no, this is how we want to do it.
Right.
And we could become, well, we don't think that's appropriate. We
Right.
want to do this.
Sure.
So then when
Sure.
you get the two chairs hitting head, then that's where
Sure.
the study by death.
Yeah. No,
Things
I
slow
understand.
down a
And
little
yeah,
bit.
Yeah,
It's complicated.
Well, we also want it to be, thoughtful. We don't, certainly we don't want any legislation to come out that, hasn't been well thought of. So, just in the interest of time, we didn't get a chance to cover lots of other.
So we can do that next month.
Yeah,
if you
next
want.
month.
Okay.
Lots,
Yeah.
always something to talk about. But I think it's important for the community, for those watching today. This is just one bill.
Right.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Among how many do you recall were submitted
There were 41
This year.
bills. There were 41 bills just to this committee.
to this committee?
This committee, and this ranges from. We had someone testifying on a ban for TikTok, which
Yep.
we've seen nationally.
Mm-hmm.
We've got legislation dealing with Chat GPT
Yep.
and artificial intelligence. I've got a bill dealing with establishing a cybersecurity control commission to try to get a hold of the whole cybersecurity
Sure.
and what companies are required to have for protections. So those are just some of
So
the highlight bills.
41 bills to this committee, but within the House and Senate
There's 6,000
for this year's session.
6,000 bills.
So just an appreciation. Sometimes I know we can all be a little bit cynical, like, no offense.
Yeah.
What are they really doing? Yeah, this is what
Why
they're
do things
doing.
take a long time?
Why do they take a long time? Because, and this is just one little conversation.
Yep.
I really appreciate your time today because I think it was very, very revealing just to kind of the thoughts that go into it. And we certainly appreciate, your support as chairs of this, of moving this through a process. So thank
So,
you.
thank you very much. I appreciate that. My House co-chair yesterday called me, and she wants there's one or two bills. She's like, look, I want to move this,
Yep. Yes.
and I'm in discussions with doing like a more comprehensive
Yep.
bill. So this is where her and I
Yep.
do we do little pieces,
Yep.
or do we do a comprehensive
Sure.
piece? And then it's we have to determine through the powers to be above us. Okay, great, we get a bill out of committee.
Yeah.
Right. But then
Do
what?
we get the support then from the
Right.
the whole body to then move those bills forward?
Sure,
So
sure.
it's a long. So it's everyone. Look, the process is designed to be difficult,
Mm-hmm.
long and difficult for a bill because you don't want us passing 6,000 bills every year.
Yeah, no,
Right, right,
absolutely.
You want the
Right.
bills vetted.
Right.
Good
Just
point.
think about
Exactly,
that.
exactly.
Right.
Karen, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
To
You did a great job off the
Thanks.
cuff.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
If we can be of any help with any information, certainly,
Absolutely.
we're ready to
Yes.
provide that. So
Thank
thank
you.
you so much.
Absolutely.
My pleasure,
Thank
thanks.
you. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the 01581 Let's Talk. We'll see you next time.